hearts are free. We believe, King Jesus, He is alive indeed. We believe that our God is alive and our hearts are free. We believe, King Jesus, He is alive indeed. King Jesus, He is alive indeed. And oh, how great your love is, how deep your kindness, how sweet your grace. And oh, how strong your mercy, through every valley you've made a When I walk through deep waters, I know that you will be with me. When I'm standing in the fire, these trials, you've always been faithful to bring healing to my soul. I am not alone. I am not alone. You will go before me. You will never leave me. I am not alone. I am not alone. You will go before me. You will never leave me.
Well, good morning, ladies. And good morning to you at home or online watching us, whether it be now or whether it be in the future. We're glad that you're with us. So the two individuals that we're going to have today, like Kelly was just telling us, we're going to learn about Joshua and Rahab. And since our text in Hebrews, if you looked, was only 2 lines, it's Hebrews 11:30 and 31. I am going to be spending a lot of time in Joshua chapters 1 through 6 to be able to get our story. So let's pray before we get started. Father, I'm just so really thankful for all that you have even done just this morning. In the songs that we sang this morning, Lord, in just the women being together, in the wisdom of Kelly's words, the fact that we are able to pray for somebody that we have heard had an accident this morning, the fact that we can bring anything and everything before you. And it's not that we're notifying you that it's happened, because you are well aware of everything even before it has happened, but that we can bring our petitions to you, our desires to you, our needs to you, our heartbreak to you, be encouraged by you. We are just so very thankful for all that you do and what it is to have you actively be in our lives. We are just thankful. So this morning in this message, there might be something in here that you have intended specifically for somebody to hear, whether it be somebody here or whether it be somebody watching online. Help them to grab onto that. Help them to know that is you directing things for them. It is you encouraging them. It is you confirming to them maybe what they've already been thinking. Help them to just know that it's you and it's certainly not me. So let, as Kelly said, but let my words be just from you. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Okay. So the two individuals, Joshua and Rahab, that we are looking at today are from two very different places in life. Joshua is an Israelite, Rahab a Canaanite. And these two nations are enemies. Joshua is well respected and has prominence within his community. Rahab is a prostitute, so she is probably disliked and shunned by many in her city. What could these two people possibly have in common that we would be setting them together? Well, we maybe are going to be surprised at how many things there are. So the first thing that I saw in the two of them in a commonality is their willingness to move. For Joshua, he's leading the troops, so he is moving forward or move out. Well, for Rahab, it's going to be a willingness to move on. So we're going to better understand their situations as we continue through and see how these apply. You know, for most of us, at some point in our life, we have probably moved, whether it's when we were little, when we've been older, whatever. And there are always good reasons for moving. You know, it might be a new job, it might be a new calling on your life, it might be retirement, might be moving to where your kids or grandkids are. But then there's also unnecessary reasons to move. You know, you're trying to keep up with the Joneses. Maybe you're too far from the mall. Or maybe spiders. Yes, this is where my story is going to come in. So very recently, I walked into our hall bath. and found that I was not alone. There was a wolf spider in there. And, we have wolf spiders in our area, in our yard. It's not something I haven't seen before, but they are not allowed in my house. Well, I thought about just stepping on it, which I just do not do well, especially when they're big and you hear them crunch. But my bath mat is very textured and different layered, and I thought, you know what, if I stepped on this thing, I will never get it out of this bath mat. So I called my husband to come in and handle it. Well, he comes in with just a tissue, which I can hardly fathom in itself, but he went down and picked it up, and in this very surprised but not quite panic level, he went, "There's babies." Yeah, this is where I voiced my need to move. But, so he managed, he got her, and he did collect, there were 6 babies, so he collected the babies and flushed them. But if you know anything about spiders, they don't have only 6 babies. I looked it up just to be sure. So I am going to show you a slide right now. And if you have an aversion to spiders, you may want to avert your eyes. Do we have that slide, Becky? Yeah. This was the potential. That's not fur on her back. Those are babies. So that was the potential that I had for what was in my home. Now you see why I thought about moving. But in truth, it really wasn't that hard to deal with since my husband took care of the spider. I got out the Raid and did a little touch-up and threw the bath mat in the washing machine, got that going. I put sticky tape across the threshold to the bedroom, just so if anybody decided to visit, it both would stop them and I would know whether or not there was anything there. Okay, so the next day I called my pest control company and moved up their visit by a few weeks. Well, it got me thinking the next day about the people in Jericho. And as they're looking over the wall and they're seeing this mass of Israelites, I wondered if they had the same dread that I had as I looked at the potential for the mass of baby spiders. The thing for them is they had nobody to call for help. So, as my spider was, their days also were numbered. So, when we move on from moving, the second thing that I thought about and saw with Joshua and Rahab that they had in common was they were both leaders. Now, that's not normally what we might think of, especially of Rahab, but I found this truly was the case, and this is where I'm primarily going to focus today. So we are going to look at the leadership qualities of both of them. But let's start out with looking at our text out of Hebrews. It's 11:30 and 31. It's up on the wall for you. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. So I'm going to start us out. We have 2 of them to look at. We'll start out with Joshua and what his role was as a leader. And I wanted us to kind of get to know Joshua a little bit. So as we meet him, he's always introduced as Joshua, son of Nun. N-U-N. It's mentioned several times, and I kind of wondered why. It got my curiosity up. Why is he, is there something extra important about Nun? Is it just a way to say, this is this Joshua, not those Joshuas? So I did a little looking into it. And what I found was that Nun was from the tribe of Ephraim. Now, if you remember Joseph, which we've looked at before, Joseph had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, Joseph normally, Jacob had the 12 sons who were the 12 tribes of Israel. But if you think about, you don't ever hear about the tribe of Joseph, because what he did, Jacob, when he blessed Joseph, he also blessed the 2 sons. And he basically took from Joseph that position and split it between Manasseh and Ephraim. So there's 2 half tribes. Okay, so, and when he went to do that blessing, Manasseh's older, Ephraim's younger. When he went to do that blessing, Normally, when you bless the older, the right hand goes on his head, the left would be on the other. But Jacob switched them, as he was a younger that was honored by the older. That's what he has done here. And Joseph, seeing what he did, just probably thought, well, Dad's old, he's dying, he doesn't know what he's doing, let me fix his hands. And he said, no, this is what it is. So Ephraim was given the more prominent blessing. And even though that's just a little background, that is who the tribe is from, where Joshua is from. So another interesting thing about Joshua is his name. The Hebrew name Joshua is the same as the Greek name Jesus. Joshua means Yahweh saves, or Yahweh is salvation. Commentators, several of them that I read, felt that Joshua is a foreshadowing in the Old Testament of Jesus in the New Testament. Not equal to, of course, by any means, but things that he did foreshadowed things Jesus would do. And an example here would be that Joshua will save his people and take them into the promised land, where Jesus saves all those who trust in him, and he's going to take them to the ultimate promised land, heaven. So there are several similarities, but I obviously don't have time to go into everything about everything. So it's a good study. You know, if it's something you might be interested in, you can follow through on that. So we now know just a little bit about Joshua, at least who he is. But how did he get in the position that we're looking at today as leader over the Israelites? If you go back just one book from Joshua, it's Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy 34:9 tells us, now Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the children of Israel heeded him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. So at God's leading, Moses had chosen Joshua already as his assistant and was preparing him to take over as leader of the Israelites when Moses could no longer lead. This is known as successor leadership. It's having the wisdom to know as the leader that at some point you may not be there, and to be able to have who God has called prepared and ready to step into that position. So from this Deuteronomy verse, we also see one of the characteristics of leadership for Joshua was wisdom. We also know from the verse that that God had called Joshua to this role. It wasn't Joshua's idea, it wasn't Moses' idea. It was who God had told Moses he wanted in that position. So Joshua's role was going to be to lead the people into the promised land. And the promise that God gave specifically to Joshua was in Joshua 1:5. And the second half of it, it says, I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Besides the fact we sang it this morning. Thank you, Ashley. And next, God gives Joshua a command or a directive. In Joshua 1:6, he says, be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. So Joshua had to stand strong and confident before the people, being assured of what God had told him. And he not only led, but he also knew that he needed to be led, but only of God. Chuck Smith said, and I quote, now here is a true picture of leadership. The finest leader is a man who is led. The finest man is a man who is ruled. God chose Joshua for a leader to rule over the people of Israel because Joshua was ruled over by the Lord, the proper chain of command. So Joshua is in this position and he takes immediate command of the people and accepts that responsibility to lead them. And this really was a step of obedience on his part. Now, whenever there is a change in leadership, acceptance of that can be slow. The people could very well have been comparing Joshua's style of leadership to Moses' style of leadership, and was Joshua measuring up to who they knew Moses to be? But Joshua was the type of leader that they needed now. Moses had led the people through the desert and was a shepherd to them, but they were in a different position now. Joshua was a military leader, and he was assigned to take them into battle and to claim the lands that God had promised him. You know, he didn't try explaining why he was a different type of a leader, not trying to keep people happy. He took ownership of his role. Even though the acceptance of change can come slowly in some cases, or in a lot of cases, here that really wasn't an option. And Joshua didn't flinch at these new responsibilities. He stood on God's commands and promises, and he knew he was doing what was best for the people. And in fact, I had to think about, the people probably recognized that they needed a leader. They were about to do something really big. They were about to cross and start claiming the lands. Not something to do on your own without a leader. Okay. And even though God had promised them these lands, it didn't mean they were going to cross the river and everybody else was going to hand them the keys and go on their way and let them have the land. They had to go in and fight for the land. So they needed a leader, and they needed one who could lead them militarily. Now, Joshua was confident in the authority that he had because he knew God had established him in that position and that God had his back. He ordered the officers over the people. They were broken up, and they had different officers over different groups. So he ordered them to get the people to be ready. He told them to be prepared and to be ready. And to me, this showed his wisdom in knowing they needed to be prepared, but it also showed wisdom as a leader in being able to delegate. Oftentimes as leaders, that's something we really have trouble doing. We're going to do it ourselves. We're just going to take care of it. Well, if you do that, you're not really leading, are you? You're just doing it. So, he also needed to be able to partner with the other leaders so that he basically had a team. And he was also in that way confirming the leaders, the officers over of their position and their importance, and confirming to the people that these were people who were to be listened to. Now, when Joshua took over, he didn't negate any of the promises that had been previously made. It wasn't like he walked in and said, okay, we're going to do everything different. He respected the promises that had been made previously. And what I'm talking about here is in Joshua 1:12-14, it tells us about how 2.5 tribes, which was the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, had been given permission by God to not cross into the promised land, but to go ahead and settle on the land on the east side of the Jordan. It was great pasture land. They had flocks. They liked it there. They were told, okay, you can stay here. But the fighting men of those tribes were still required to continue on with the rest of the Israelite nation to fight battle. So the women, the children, the flocks, and probably some men there to protect them were able to stay. But the warriors had to continue on with the rest of the group and would be allowed to go back home after everything was conquered. So in Joshua 2:1, we see Joshua sending the spies into Jericho. And I saw here too that he had already set the example. He was not asking them to do something he hadn't done, because if you remember, when this whole thing started back, the spies were sent in and they came back, and only Joshua and Caleb were ones that said, yeah, let's go for it. The rest of these guys are too big. We can't do this. Okay, so he had set the example of what it was to go in and spy and take a look at things. So, and when he sent them in, knowing even, God had promised him this. So does this look like he's doubting? But he wasn't. He wasn't doubting God at all. He was being prepared. He was going to have to do a military leading in, and the more information he had, the better off, even though he knew God had given him the victory, because why would he go in and attack a well-fortified, powerful city if he didn't know God was going to give it to him? So he was actually acting in faith. And in Joshua 3:1-4, Joshua is giving orders to his officers. Now, when you want things done in a specific way, it's wisest to give specific directions. And that's what he did. He told them exactly what needed to be done so the people would be ready when God gave the next step to go forward. And in Joshua 3:5, We see Joshua as an encourager. He told the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." Boy, that's pretty encouraging to know. When you are about to go into battle, that you know God is going with you and he is going to do something really cool. Joshua was also a spiritual leader. When it was time to cross the Jordan, Joshua could remember what God had done for Moses, for the people when they crossed the Red Sea, how he parted the waters, they crossed on dry ground. Well, David Guzik, who's one of the commentators we read, said it well, and I quote, "Joshua didn't send the Army Corps of Engineers first. Instead, he sent the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant, which was the visible representation of God's presence with the people. Joshua knew this was a spiritual problem, not a feat of human engineering." So this was a spiritual battle with Jericho, not just a military one. And he needed the people to understand this and to be prepared. They were to expect a miracle when they went after Jericho, because God had told them they would have one. Joshua had led them in a way of expectation and confidence. I also see Joshua as being humble. In chapter 3, we read where God is going to exalt him before the people by them crossing the Jordan and how it would all work. But again, Joshua doesn't exalt himself in any way. He always points the people towards God. In chapter 4, 2-7, Joshua gives the people a vision for the future. He has them pile the 12 stones. He has the guys go in and collect the 12 stones and piles them up on the dry land in the middle of the Jordan, where the Jordan River will resume, and also on the dry ground in the promised land. These are called Ebenezers. These are things that you look at and remember why they are there. So, how that gives them a vision of the future is, as time goes on and the Israelites will go by these Ebenezers, they're going to say, kids are going to say, "Why are these stones here?" Well, they can then hear the story of what God had done for their people. And as he explains the purpose of it to the people, I felt like he was also really giving them ownership of it. It's something they were involved in. It's something they could hold on to also. They had walked across dry ground in the Jordan River, just as the generation before them had walked across dry ground in the parting of the Red Sea when Moses led them through. So Joshua didn't forget the people in the background either, the people that you don't notice. And I'm thinking about the priests who are holding the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the people were told to stay like 1,000 feet back from the Ark. But my guess is if the Ark of the Covenant is there and you're walking by, that's what you're going to look at, not the guys holding it up. Somebody's not going to walk by and go, "Hey, Joe, thanks." They aren't even going to see the priests. But when it came time for the priests to come out, when everybody had crossed over and it was time for the priests to come out for the water to flow again, it was Joshua who called them out. He didn't send one of his captains and say, "Oh yeah, by the way, can you go get the priests and bring them?" It wasn't that. Joshua honored them by doing that himself. Now in chapter 5, we have the people finally entering the promised land. 40 years. Took them 40 years. But there's only one problem here. This is a generation that was born in the wilderness. So all of the things that Jewish people do, specifically Jewish men do, to prove they are Jewish, wasn't done out in the wilderness. So God tells Joshua, "Take your flint stone, and all the men need to be circumcised." So the only thing I'll really say here is be willing to do the tough stuff if you are a leader. So, Joshua also, this proves how much Joshua trusted God for the outcome of what was going to happen. They are supposed to be going into battle, and I can guarantee you the enemy already knew they were in the land. I mean, this is a big group of people. But Joshua still does what God tells him. So his warriors are all incapacitated until they heal. So Joshua is still trusting that God is going to take care of this. The next thing the Israelites do is celebrate Passover. And you can bet Joshua's right in there with them, celebrating and remembering that, which shows that Joshua was keeping spiritual things a priority also. Joshua also had to lead the people in a transition to a whole new way of life. When they crossed over into the promised land and they started eating the food of the promised land, the manna that they had been having as their only food for years stopped. So this is a people that now has to learn how to feed themselves. So, and as a leader, Joshua is also willing to confront. He showed courage when the man with the sword, and if you read the story, he looks up, and at the end of the road, there's a man standing there with the sword. Now, Joshua confronts him and says, "Are you friend or foe?" basically. But I thought it was real wisdom on his part not to just go charging out because he sees a man with a sword, because this individual, Joshua never would have made it through that, because who this individual was the commander of the Lord's army. It was Jesus. And Joshua recognized that, and he worshiped him. He honored him and worshiped him, which reminds us to never forget who the real commander-in-chief is. Now, when it came time to march around Jericho, Joshua also had to be brave enough to think outside the box and trust God for God's plan. This was not the normal way to go to war. Silently marching around a city for 6 days, and then on the last one march, blow horns, and yell. That's not the norm. But he did it. And he had to show the confidence in this plan, because the people were probably, you can imagine them going, "Yeah, what?" But this is what was to be done. And being the leader doesn't always mean you get the prize either. All the things in this city were to be devoted to the Lord. Often when they would go to war, they would bring all the treasures out, to keep for themselves. And I can imagine a leader would get more because he had led. Well, here, nobody was to take anything, and that included Joshua. So to wrap up what I've seen in Joshua's leadership traits, the last one was that he kept his promise to Rahab. She and her family were spared. So to just do an overview of what I've seen in Joshua's leadership traits, he had a willingness to move. He was given wisdom. He faithfully served the one leading him, first Moses and ultimately always God. He answered the call of God. He was strong and courageous, confident in God. He knew also that he needed to be led, but by God, of course. He was obedient. He stepped in immediately. He led with skills that God had given him. He was a military leader. He did not worry or try to excuse, he didn't try to be somebody else, in other words. He didn't try to be Moses. He took ownership of the role that had been given to him. He could delegate. He uplifted other leaders, kept promises previously made by others, respected other leaders, set the example. He used others' ideas, like it wasn't his idea originally to be part of the group to go in and spy. So he used the wisdom of what Moses had done and sent them in. He communicated clearly. He had foresight in preparation. He was a spiritual leader as well as a military one. He was humble, able to give a vision for the future. He involved others in the process, giving them ownership of it. He was willing to do the tough things. He kept his priorities in order. He helped the people transition to a new life. He was willing to confront a threat and protect his people. And he kept the promise to Rahab to spare her and to spare her family. And so now we get to see Rahab. So, looking at Rahab, you might not think, but she too was a leader, but with a different mission. And all of our information about Rahab comes out of Joshua 2 and some out of chapter 6 also. She was a leader called by God, but she didn't know it yet. We don't know why Rahab was in the line of work that she was in. It may have been her only way to be able to make a living in Jericho. She did have a house because it's where all of the family went to be able to be saved from the attack. So maybe she was also the provider for her whole family. And she used the leadership skills she had to be able to support her family. And these are just my suppositions. I like to give her the benefit of the doubt. But let's take a look at what the Word tells us about Rahab. So in chapter 2, verses 2 through 6, this is where the king has realized there's spies in the city and that they've gone to Rahab's house. And he sends the guards to question her. And she lies to the guards to protect the spies. As a leader, Rahab had to stand alone to take care of others. She had to be brave and courageous in hiding the spies and lying to the king. As a leader, you need to know what leadership to follow. She had known to follow God's leadership. Rahab had seen what God's people could accomplish because of the God they served. Commentators that I had read felt that Rahab actually had come to faith before the spies were even there, because it talks about that when she gives that declaration to the spies, she's declaring what she had already decided. I'm sure she didn't have, a total understanding of it, but that was where her faith was. In chapter 2, verses 8 to 13, she shows herself to be wise and tactful. She tells the spies what she believes about their God, and in making this declaration, she can assure them that she is not a threat to them and that she can be trusted. In chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, she's asking for the safety of her family. And as a leader, you need to be able to speak up for the people that you represent. In chapter 2, verses 14 to 19, the spies give their pledge of safety, and she lowers them down the wall. She had to trust what they pledged, but ultimately, she was trusting in the God that they represented. In chapter 2, verse 21, Rahab agrees to their secret plan, and as a leader, it was important for her to keep her promise. Her words and her actions proved her trustworthiness. In 2 verses 21 again, and chapter 6 verses 22 and 23, Rahab followed through on what she said she would do. She tied the scarlet cord in the window, and when it was time, she brought her family in for their safety. And, they must have trusted her character because they came. In chapter 6, verse 25, Rahab and her family joined the Israelites. Her situation now has changed drastically. Sometimes a leader has to be flexible. They have to be willing to change things based on some circumstances. Rahab had become a believer and was willing to move on from what she had known and live with God's people, and she brought her family with her. So as a leader, Rahab knew she needed to take action when she was the only one who could see the need. So what I saw in a short list of Rahab's leadership traits: she stood up against a whole culture, town, and king. She stood up for God's people, and she stood up for God's principles. She protected her family. She did what was right. And she didn't let her circumstances hold her back. So now going back to the first question I asked when we started is, what could these two people possibly have in common that we would study them together? Well, let's do a recap on them. They were both leaders, both brave and courageous, both spiritual leaders, both protectors, both trustworthy and kept their word. They were both connected to Jesus. Joshua as a foreshadowing of Jesus, and Rahab is in his lineage. They were both wise. It's a direct gift from God. And her, obviously it's a gift from God, but it may have been tweaked by some street smarts. They both took charge when needed. They both experienced a miracle from God. God destroyed the powerful city of Jericho under Joshua's leadership, except for Rahab's home, and Rahab saw her home remain standing. They were both willing to move on. And they both led others forward to better circumstances and better places. So Joshua and Rahab did what they did because it needed doing. Neither one of them knew they would be a part of history or they would be read about for generations. And it's really the same for us. We do what we do because it needs to be done, not realizing that every day we can be showing those same leadership skills that Joshua and Rahab showed. Every day we have that opportunity to be brave and courageous. Maybe it's going to be in making a hard choice or a decision. Maybe it's going to be standing up for someone else or standing up for God's principles. Maybe it's even just going to the dentist. And maybe it's being able to take that step out of your home. Leading is showing godly traits in our everyday actions and lives. So ladies, let's go out and lead.